All right, ready to dive into some research methods.
Always ready.
We're talking case studies and desk research today, and how to really use them, not just for the exams, but
And for real research, too.
exactly.
For sure.
So think of it like a detective's toolkit, right? Each method is a different tool for a different job. First up, case studies. I always picture like those crime documentaries,
Oh, yeah, I know what you mean.
super intense, piecing together every detail. So what are case studies really all about? How do they actually work?
Think of it like a magnifying glass. You're focusing on one specific case, right?
Say,
Could be a person, a company, even a whole community. The goal is to understand that one case in detail.
so it's not about generalizing then.
Not really, no. It's about depth.
Gotcha. So instead of like interviewing tons of people, you might spend weeks with just one person really going deep,
Exactly. You get those rich, qualitative insights.
not just numbers and stats.
Right, it's about the full story.
Interviews, observations, all of it.
Yeah, all of that.
All right, so that's case studies in a nutshell. Now, desk research. Honestly, it sounds a bit less exciting. Is it all just dusty archives and reports?
Not necessarily, no. It's actually all about efficiency.
Oh, how so?
Think of it like this. You're still a detective. But instead of hitting the streets, you're hitting the books.
Or the databases nowadays.
Right. All that info is already out there,
Yeah,
just
yeah.
waiting to be analyzed.
Clever. So you're building on what's already been done.
But doesn't it get overwhelming, sifting through all that data?
There are methods, don't worry, like content analysis, for example.
What's that?
You systematically go through texts,
Okay.
looking for themes and patterns.
Like a textual detective.
Exactly.
So that's for qualitative data. But what about all those numbers? How do researchers handle that with desk research?
Secondary data analysis is your friend there.
Ah, okay.
Think census data, economic reports, all those big data sets.
And you're applying them to your research question.
So it's like repurposing that data to answer new questions.
Uh,
Clever. But let's go back to case studies for a second. It seems pretty straightforward. Pick a case, dig deep. But are there different types of case studies?
there are actually, yeah,
Oh,
each with a different purpose.
like what?
We have exploratory ones, descriptive ones, and explanatory ones.
Oh, hold on. That sounds very textbooky.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Back just said.
Could you give us some examples?
Sure, sure. So imagine a company's new product is failing. They could do an exploratory case study to try and understand why.
Like talking to customers and stuff?
Exactly, getting a feel for the problem.
Okay.
Or let's say researchers are studying social media in teenagers, how it affects their self-esteem.
Yeah.
They might do a descriptive case study.
Oh.
Follow a group of teens for a year, analyze their social media use.
Makes sense. What about explanatory case studies then?
Think about a study on a new teaching method. Researchers could compare two classrooms, one using the new method, one using the old one.
Right, and see there's a difference.
Exactly. That would be explanatory, trying to figure out the cause and effect.
Wow, so many possibilities. Choosing the right type must be crucial.
It is, yeah, and that's just one part of it. Designing a case study is like building a house.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Break it down for me.
Well, first, you need the right case, obviously.
What, one that's relevant to your question?
It's got to be strategic.
Not just convenient.
Exactly.
Reliability is key.
Like a detective wouldn't rely on just one eyewitness.
Exactly. You need multiple sources of information.
Okay.
We call this triangulation.
Triangulation.
Yeah, using different methods to get a complete picture.
So if you're studying, say, employee morale, you wouldn't just do interviews.
Right. You might look at company emails, observe interactions.
Even things like absentee rates.
Exactly. It's like double-checking your math using different formulas.
The more evidence, the stronger your case, literally.
Literally.
Okay. Before we move to desk research, is there anything else on case studies? Well, it's important to remember that even though they're valuable, they do have limitations.
Okay, let's talk about those.
Well, one is they can be really time-consuming
Yeah, makes sense.
and resource-intensive. You're dealing with a lot of data.
Yeah, it's not a quick research method for sure.
Nope. And another issue is the findings might not always be generalizable.
What do you mean?
You're focusing on one specific case, right? So the results might not apply in other situations.
So be mindful of the context.
Yeah.
Don't overgeneralize.
Exactly.
Now, how do case studies fit in with, like, the bigger research world? Are they always standalone, or can you combine them with other approaches?
They can be powerful on their own, especially for exploratory research.
When you're just starting out.
Right. But you can also combine them with other methods.
Oh, interesting.
Qualitative or quantitative?
Can you give us an example?
Sure, imagine researching the impact of a new government policy. You could start with a case study on one community.
Okay, get that in-depth data.
Exactly, and then you could do a wider survey. See if those trends hold true on a larger scale.
So you get the best of both worlds.
Exactly.
This has been really eye-opening. Case studies, they're not just for Sherlock Holmes anymore. They're a powerful tool for understanding the world, whether it's business, social issues, anything, really. Speaking of tools, let's switch gears to desk research. It might sound less glamorous, but
It's just as crucial.
maybe even more so these days with all the data we have.
Definitely.
I'm ready to dive into those archives. What are the advantages? Why should students care about this?
Well, one of the biggest advantages is its efficiency. You're not starting from scratch.
So you save time and resources.
Exactly.
That's music to a student's ears.
For sure. And another advantage is the access to data. Data you couldn't collect yourself.
Okay, like what?
Historical data, government records, even social media trends.
Wow, it's like having a superpower.
Haha, kinda.
So you can answer all sorts of questions with this.
Yep. From historical trends to future predictions.
That's amazing. So with case studies, we're going deep on one case. And with desk research, we're going broad, looking for patterns.
You got it. Yeah.
All about picking the right approach.
Exactly.
This is already making me feel better about those exams. But before we get too ahead of ourselves, let's break down desk research a bit more. What kind of research questions work best with this approach?
It's really useful when you need a lot of background info or historical context. It's also great for exploring trends, especially with large amounts of data.
So things like policy analysis, market research, historical research.
Those are all areas where desk research shines.
It's not just about old documents then.
Not at all. It's
Yeah.
very relevant today, especially with the explosion of data we have.
Big data, yeah.
Exactly. Researchers need to be good at finding and analyzing existing data.
To make sense of the world.
Yep.
It sounds like a vital skill for the 21st century.
Ab-
All right, so desk research is awesome. And not just about dusty archives. But let's get practical. How do you actually do it? Where do you find all this information? How do you make sense of it?
That's where those research methods come in. Content analysis, secondary data analysis.
Right.
But even before that, the first step is knowing where to look.
Because it's not all just in one big organized database, right?
Unfortunately not, no. So you need good research skills.
So it's like being a detective, but for data sources.
Exactly. And you need to be thorough.
Okay, I'm putting on my detector hat. Let's break down these methods a bit more, starting with content analysis. What does that involve?
It's all about systematically examining texts,
Okay.
looking for patterns, themes, meanings,
And what kind of texts?
all sorts. News articles, social media posts, historical documents, even literature.
Wow, so you're really diving into the language,
Exactly.
trying to understand how people communicate.
And by analyzing those patterns, we can understand the social cultural forces at play.
I'm starting to see how powerful this can be. But it sounds a bit subjective. How do you stay objective?
That's a great question. The key is to be systematic and transparent.
Okay.
Define your research question clearly. Develop a coding scheme.
So it's structured,
Yes.
very methodical.
So it's not just reading and interpreting however you want.
No, it's got to be rigorous.
Makes sense.
Hmm.
Now, what about secondary data analysis? How is that different?
That's all about working with numerical data, data that someone else has already collected.
Oh, okay.
Think census data, economic indicators, survey results.
You're using existing data to answer your research question.
Exactly.
It sounds efficient, but I imagine there are challenges too.
There are.
Like what?
The biggest one is making sure the data is appropriate for your question.
Okay.
You need to consider the source, the methodology, and any potential biases.
Right. Like checking for biases in the data.
Precisely. You have to be critical.
So just because the data's there doesn't mean it's good.
Exactly.
It's about being a smart consumer of information. Absolutely.
We've covered a lot today, both case studies and desk research, and I'm already feeling more confident about those exams. Speaking of exams, remember, this deep dive is brought to you by Grade Guru. For practice exams, full lecture summaries, and all the resources you need, head over to gradeguru.nl. They've got you covered. Now, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to leave you with a question. We've talked about case studies and desk research separately, but are they always so distinct? Could there be situations where they blur, where a case study informs desk research, or vice versa? It's something to think about as you explore the world of research methods.
It's a great question. And yeah, sometimes those lines can get blurry. Think about it, a really deep case study. It might reveal something, some trend or pattern that could lead to a whole new desk research project.
Oh, I see.
Or you could start with desk research, get a broad overview, and then use that to design a really focused case study.
So they can work together,
They can, definitely.
like two sides of the same coin.
Exactly.
You need both the wide view and the close-up.
To really get the full picture.
Okay, we've talked about the strengths, the methods, even the pitfalls.
Yeah.
Anything else students should know about desk research, especially for those exams?
One thing that trips people up is evaluating sources.
Oh, yeah, good point.
It's easy to get excited, find all this info, but you can't just assume everything is true.
Right, not everything you read is accurate.
Exactly.
So how do you avoid that? How do you know if a source is reliable?
It's all about being a critical thinker.
Right.
Always question your sources.
Like, who's behind the information?
Right. And look for evidence to support their claims.
Fact-checking, basically.
Exactly.
What are some red flags students should look out for?
Bias is a big one.
Okay.
Is the source pushing a particular agenda? Are they selective with the information they present?
To make your point stronger.
Right. So always think about their motivations.
And it's not always intentional, right?
You're right. Sometimes it's unintentional.
Like their methodology might be flawed or...
Yeah, or their perspective is limited.
So look for sources that are transparent about that.
Exactly.
Do they explain how they got their data? Do they acknowledge any weaknesses?
Those are good signs.
So it's not just about the information itself, but also the context.
Exactly.
What other red flags are there?
Outdated information is another one.
Oh, right. Especially in fields that are always changing.
Exactly. What was true 10 years ago might not be true now.
Always check the publication date then.
Yeah.
So we've got bias, outdated info, any other traps to avoid.
One more. Use a variety of sources.
Don't just rely on one website or book.
Right. Cast a wide net, get different perspectives.
What, getting multiple opinions before making a decision?
Exactly. It's about being a critical consumer of information.
Which is a skill you need in research and in life, really.
For sure.
I love that. It's not just about exams, it's about being informed. This desk research deep dive has been fantastic. I feel like I've learned so much. And speaking of learning, don't forget about Grade Guru. They've got everything you need to ace those exams, practice exams, summaries, tons of resources. Check them out at gradeguru.nl. Now, one final question for you before we move on. We've talked about credible sources, avoiding bias, but is it ever okay to use sources that are biased? Like, what if you're studying political speeches and you want to analyze speeches from different sides?
That's a great question. And it's tricky. The answer isn't always simple. Sometimes using biased sources can be valuable if you're studying the bias itself.
Okay, I see, like understanding how propaganda works.
Exactly. But you have to be transparent about it.
So, acknowledge that the sources are biased.
Right, and explain why you're using them.
It's all about context then.
Exactly.
And even with credible sources, there's always some subjectivity.
That's true.
No research is perfectly objective.
You're right. You have to be aware of your own biases too.
It's like that saying, we see the world as we are. Our experiences shape how we interpret things.
Even in research.
So be reflective, be critical.
And always question your assumptions.
Great advice. This has been such an insightful conversation. We've gone beyond the basics of desk research.
We have.
And really explored some deeper questions about objectivity, bias, and knowledge itself.
Important stuff.
And now, as we get ready for our final thoughts, I want to leave you with this. We've talked about case studies and desk research separately, but the real power is in understanding how they work together.
Absolutely.
It's like having a toolbox full of different tools. You wouldn't use a hammer to screw in a screw, right?
Right?
Same with research methods. Pick the right tool for the job.
And don't be afraid to combine them.
Be creative.
Yeah.
So when you're studying or even doing research later on, don't get stuck thinking you have to use one method or the other. Be flexible. Be creative.
Yeah, for sure.
Use all the tools you've got to get those answers.
Absolutely.
And don't be afraid to, think outside the box.
Sometimes the best research comes from challenging the norms.
Exactly. It's about pushing those boundaries. We've covered so much ground in this deep dive. I feel like I really get these methods now. And I kind of appreciate research more,
Yeah, it's a fascinating field.
It is. But before we wrap up, huge shout out to Grade Guru for making this happen. If you want to ace those exams, gradeguru.nl is the place to be. Practice exams, summaries, all those resources. Okay, one final thought for you all as you keep learning. We talked about choosing the right method, evaluating sources, all that. But research, it's more than just methods and data. It's about curiosity. It's about asking questions
Yeah.
and using those questions to understand ourselves, the world. So keep that curiosity alive.
That's what drives us forward.
Exactly. Never stop questioning, never stop exploring. That's all for this deep dive, folks. Until next time, keep those minds curious and keep on learning.